Hello, Madeline Ritter. Hello, Boomershine. I'm very pleased to have the chance today to talk to you, to interview you. You both as the artistic directors of Dance On Ensemble Berlin. And very happy to have you here and to talk to you. So thank you very much. You recently had a wonderfully successful premiere called A Sky Like a Wall with your ensemble on 29th of November in the Museum Berlinische Galerie in cooperation with the soloist ensemble Kaleidoscope. Thank you very much for that also. Sure. Yeah. Jutta Hell and Dieter Baumann from the dance company Rubato are both older than 60 years, exactly 69 and 70 years old, and both are still active dancers. And Louise Le Cavalier, the world-famous Canadian dancer choreographer of the former company La 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 Human Steps, I guess you know her, is 66 years old. She has just performed in Dresden-Hellerau and is celebrated throughout the European and international dance scene as a still active dancer. So, my first question to both of you. So first, Madeline, what was your motivation in the year 2015 about initiating a dance company called Dance On Ensemble?
Well, I could start with the two examples you just mentioned. Who wouldn't want them to see? I know the two, Jutta and Dieter, from the very, very beginning. It was also my program career when they were hitting each other. Nobody had done that on stage at that time. So I'm a living archive as an audience to them, to that experience in our little theater in Cologne. And also the amazing work they have done with Gerhard Bohner in that way, carrying on the work of the other, which we will talk later about, because that is also inspiring. And the same with Louise Le Cavalier. The first time I saw her on a stage flying like nobody can fly. I've never seen something like that. And then it was, I think, 2 years ago, and she's she's dancing. It's not about still dancing. And so maybe that is one of the reasons we want to see mature dancers performing in these most amazing ways you can imagine. But maybe on a cultural political impulse we had, aside from this joy, which is sitting right beside me, a dancer and the director of the company, Boomershine, to see him perform, which you're still doing, right? Not just organizing and directing the company. So the cultural political reason came from our thinking what is needed in dance. We had done very big new funding schemes for the whole dance sector in Germany with the Tanzplan, where we started new training, higher education for dance in a very open way. And then we looked what is missing. And then we came to the dance heritage as an art form which doesn't have create an access or visibility of its own history. We have all the monuments in the world to see, to walk around. We travel around the world to visit them, but what kind of dance are we seeing? What is still visible? And so with this kind of thinking, what is needed to strengthen the art of dance, the question of age came into our awareness. I have a former dancer in my team, Ricarda, and said, well, what to do about it? And we actually talked to many people and took a whole year, and finally it became clear, we will fund a company for dancers over 40. The answer seems simple. The process to that point wasn't evident because we had been a funding body and not having a dance company body. And another point which motivates me until today is I don't think any person should have an expiry date defined by others. It should be the dancer who decides when to stop. It should be the dancer to decide with whom he or she wants to work, and not the other way around. And we didn't find a situation like that. And maybe one last point, because you mentioned both Dieter and Jutta, and also Louise. They both are their own makers. So they make the choreography for their own body. So we see a lot of choreographers who are also performing their own, and I could name a couple more. But the dancer, obviously, who just dances, doesn't have the choice still. And that was the reason why we said, well, it can be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would also pass, Ty, the question to you, but more as a dancer. After all your experiences, what is your motivation and what is the special that you pass on to continue with the ensemble, dance-on ensemble after 10 years? I mean, it's running now for 10 years.
It's probably an older ensemble.
I know.
Not even old dancer, an older ensemble.
Well, I think the first thing is what Madeline mentioned, that for the dancer, it's very difficult to maintain a creative life past a certain age simply because of the needs or the specifics of a contract in these larger companies, and smaller, to be honest. It's not just the large ballet companies that retire people at 40. It's also small contemporary projects. No one mentions it because it's not a established contractual year-long contract, but many small projects in the contemporary field do the same. They quietly retire you at 40, unless you're making your own work. So I think it's an important distinction because it's the dancer brings something else to the interpretation, to the creation of a choreographer's work. And I think that participation is more than important, it's necessary. It's great that choreographers dance in their own work, and I think that's interesting. But it is not the same as working with people over a long period of time. Or more importantly, what Dance On offers is to work with new people who have a lot of experience, because that is something that is still wildly subtracted from the dance field. There are very few, if any, examples I can give of a choreographer hiring a 50-year-old dancer that they've never worked with before, wanting that experience, wanting to see that age and possibility and what they can bring to a rehearsal process on stage. Dance On provides that to great success, I have to say, without patting myself in the back or us. But it's simply true. The audiences are deeply affected by it, as are the choreographers who we work with. They come in possibly a bit hesitant, curious, but not sure, and they all of them leave with an amazing experience of understanding that not only do we have a lot to offer from our brains, but we are still good dancers who can do their work, who can bring something interesting to their work. And I think that's a very important distinction that a lot of people mention. Well, the dancers in Pina Bausch still dance. The dancers with various choreographers, Forsyth, when he was still active, different people kept their dancers. And I always say, yes, they kept them from 20, possibly into their 50s, but no one, and including these people, ever hired a dancer over 45, knew that they had to explain their work to or train or to see what that meant. There's a pervading idea that if you're 20, you can take a style quicker and you can learn faster, and I'm sure there's neurological proof of that the brain is more adaptive, but it takes away or subtracts what an older dancer brings, the experience, the knowledge, and the ability to offer something to a choreographic process that a 19-year-old can't. And I think that's poorly misunderstood by directors, choreographers, not by audiences. They get it immediately, and they understand it and they appreciate it. But it's something that still has to be educated, I find.
And it gives a hope for the younger dancers who see that
Exactly.
there is a sustainable career. We had this effect where there was a whole 2 dance departments in the audience in Slovenia, and they were just, they saw these masterworks from Lucinda. They thought, well, this is how dance can look, and then this is how dancers can look.
Yeah.
How old are they?
Yeah.
Whoa! I can go on. And that was really the image, which even the young ones, they come from a very different moment. The image of dance is of a time-limited activity for the dancers. Yeah. It's still very strongly in the head.
Yeah. Yes. And just to finish.
I know that.
Yeah.
That it's very deeply in mind and body also.
Sure. Yeah. I should say also, just to finish, because sometimes this is sort of an argument that I hear from directors or choreographers, that what are we supposed to do, have entire companies full of older dancers? And I think in dance, well, there's this entire black and white, it's all or nothing. And I think it's important to understand that what we're suggesting or what we're offering is not keep everyone young out of professional positions. And that's obviously not the case. There are plenty of dance companies that are going to keep young dancers, and that's fine. And all we want is simply a place for these dancers to work, and for the understanding that older dancers can work in your work. It's not to replace everyone, because that is a lot of feedback I get from choreographers, that what am I supposed to do, only work with people over 50? And it's of course not. But it is possible that you can, and that it shouldn't be a removal completely, because what we see now is the opposite. There is no representation. So just to say, it's not an all or nothing. But.
Yeah, coming to the theme of archiving. When designing the Dance Archive Berlin, we always speak of a lively archive. And by this we mean that the documentation, the archiving, and the revisiting of archived dance and also choreographic material should be understood as a continuously moving process. On the Dance Ensemble website I read, based on its wealth of experience, the ensemble brings groundbreaking works of modern dance history by iconic choreographers such as Moss Cunningham and Lucinda Childs to the stage, and invites contemporary artists to provide congenial replies. I like this statement. So what significance does documentation and archiving have for you in connection with the Dance Ensemble? And would you also speak of a live or living archive in your work? So question to both of you.
I do start, because it came very much from the experience we had with the Dance Fund Heritage, Tanz von Erbe, where we thought it's really the artist who should exercise the archive, be it their own, be it from someone else, and make something which speaks right now as a living archive in whatever form, as open. So it's not just about reconstructing. So that was the idea, because what is missing, because documenting and having documents and archival material and having archives who keep them and make them accessible, that's not something which is visible. And so the pieces have to be danced. That means being experienced by the dancers, who then have that knowledge in their bodies, but very important, the audience. So for me, it was very much about accessing the archive. That's the important, because that is missing so much. What kind of accesses and experience we create, feeling responsible for this art form, for the artists themselves, but also for a general audience who can walk in even in any museum and have all this amazing work. All the theater pieces are played all over and over again, but we don't have that in dance. The idea that the repertoire is the archive, and with that I give to you, because you came up with this idea of the Reply project. That was really how that came along, and I was happy. I said, yes, it makes sense. So because Tanz von Erbe had ended, and I said, well, but this is still missing.
I think the idea came about because we had this work from Merce Cunningham, which I should speak about. I worked at the Cunningham company for a short time, and I met the director, and he said, we have no representation in Germany currently for the centenary of Merce Cunningham, which was in 2019. He would have been 100. And he said, couldn't your company do something? And I thought, oh, Lord, what will we do? And Cunningham is a good example of a really functional archive. They have these beautiful dance capsules. So they directed me to this. I searched the capsules, a really well laid out website where you can look at pieces and make decisions. And I chose a piece, which I think is relative to this, called Story from 1963, which hadn't been restaged. I thought, well, this is interesting. No one has seen it since 1964, when it was last performed. It was never brought back in the company. And so I contacted them, and they said, well, no one's done it, so we don't think it's a good idea. And I thought, no, come on, we can do it. And they said, well, there's only one recording. It was done in Finland, and the idea of the piece is that it changes every show. So there's only one example, although every time it was performed, it was very, very different. The order was changed. And so we came up with this idea the first time the Cunningham Foundation had done a reimagining. So I think 85%, I can say, of the piece is documented, but there was this 15% missing. There are notes and there are drawings and some directions from Merce's handwriting. So they sent a person from the company to stage the work on us, and with him and with us to fill in that missing bit. But the important aspect was that we perform it live, even with this missing aspect, because the trust didn't want us to perform it because something is missing. And I thought, well, isn't it even more important that we perform it? And they agreed, and luckily Ken Tabachnik, the then director of the Cunningham Trust, he came to see it twice live, and he completely changed his mind about how they approach the trust and how they save the work. Because he said, it's live, we see it. And he said, yes, maybe 10% is not what Merce did. Who can say? We don't know. Even if they restaged it in the company, maybe Merce wouldn't have remembered. But it was more important that it was done live, and we did do it, and it was great. I bring that up because that piece is about 30 minutes long, and we did this as part of the centenary, but we wanted it to have a life. And we thought, well, what do we do it with in a full evening program? And I thought, well, Lord, what do you do it with? And we looked at our repertoire, and nothing made sense. And so we thought, well, what if we asked someone to make a piece to accompany it? And genuinely to accompany it, to look at the piece, to even follow rehearsals, to just react, to reply in their way. And for this piece, for example, we asked Mathilde Monnier, and she made a reaction to the Cunningham piece in a very beautiful way that has very little on the surface to do with the Cunningham piece, but the more you see it and the more you understand it, you do realize it has everything to do with the piece. Like, she would not have made this piece without having seen Story.
And for the audience, for the Cunningham piece, they do strange things, and
very
so
strange.
they have to get used. I mean, wow, what is that? And then at the end of the evening, with the reply, it sort of reinforms the first one. So it's like in a museum, which is always a good reference when you talk about the heritage. You go from one room in the next, and the one experience informs the other. And this is why we felt, and we will go on with the reply, because we feel that is beautiful. Both the artists involved, the dancers, also to be in a contemporary piece and really digging in the material and the historic material, and they take joy in that. It's really a discovery process. And then for the audience, it makes more sense. It opens it up.
Sure. Comparing the work about Merce Cunningham material with Lucinda Childs. I mean, it's quite different. If you compare it, what is the difference in working it with an ensemble?
Once she's alive.
Yes, sure.
With Merce, I worked there, so for me it wasn't new to me. But for the dancers of the ensemble, what I should also bring up is their curiosity. which I think is important at this age. If you're not still curious about learning new forms, and not just physical forms, but choreographic approaches, you have to have this curiosity to want to keep dancing. And if you don't have that, then not only is this ensemble not a place for you, it's not the right fit, because what I look for are challenges for the dancers. And although it was not new to me, for the other dancers in the piece, they had never danced a Cunningham piece. So not only was the physical approach new and challenging, but also the idea of chance, that the order changes, that the cast changes, the time changes, the length of time you dance something. Every show it changes, and that's a very Cunningham approach, this chance procedure. And for the dancers, it was mind-blowing. They loved it. They loved that the costume changed, that the visual artist on stage that we work with is new in every city, painting or building a sculpture or running around. They don't know what's going to happen. So for me, that's and the approach is important. And Lucinda Child's work is very different. It's very formulated. It's very rhythmic. These works we restaged from the early 70s are all in silence. So they require the group to maintain a pulse together, to find a rhythm and to practice that and to keep it within all the complications that happen within the work. And that approach, again, it wasn't new to me, but to the dancers, it was all very new and very challenging and very rewarding in the end. They all comment on how hard it was for them and how satisfying it is to finish the work and to bow and to understand. And Lucinda loved it, yeah. I was happy to bring these pieces back to life. Several of them haven't been seen since the 70s.
And what did Lucinda say?
Oh, she was thrilled. She finally saw it in Barcelona. We did it during COVID, so she wasn't able to come over. So finally, not so long ago, there was an entire festival around Lucinda Child's work. And we got to perform it in this festival, and she was thrilled. And she said she didn't remember how beautiful they were. And I was like, I
it's
know.
like when you look at old pictures from yourself, right? Oh, at 20, I look beautiful. And then it's interesting that you can do this with work.
Sure.
You rediscover your work and said, wow, I did that. Huh?
Yeah. For me, it was like a sort of what is that called? Archaeology. And it was sort of like to be poetic in a bad way, but it was like a flower because it just unfolded in front of me. I had the scores. Some had video, some had broken video, but Lucinda really scores all of her work in a very detailed way that you have to kind of understand for each piece. And I didn't know what they would look like. So as they unfolded in front of me day by day, I realized like, oh, this is great. I'm so glad I'm doing this. Also, just as a director, because I thought these are beautiful, and these should be seen, and they're timeless. And as you said, it's important for heritage to be seen, but also just as a show, they're just really good. And I think it's important that they're seen. And when people see the date is 1973, let them be shocked or moved or surprised, but they're just good pieces.
And we will go on with the reply idea because we feel it is a very beautiful way, exactly as you were saying, when we talk about a living archive. How could that work? And for us, we found a way that this is interesting.
And it also brings other audiences. I mean, for example, we did a reply with Tim Etchells and a Martha Graham solo from I always forget the date, 52, something like this, something like that. I'll look it up later. But and Tim Etchells created a neon word installation that the dancer dances under and in, and the lights change, so the sentences change meaning, and it has reference to what she's dancing, the time she was dancing, about the Spanish Civil War. And it's timeless. It's about war and it's about death, and it could be today.
Actually.
You see it and you think, is this about Ukraine? Or is this about Syria? And it's like, it's about the Spanish Civil War. And it's fascinating to think like, and it brings a new audience. People came to see Tim Etchells' work because they're fans of his installations. Or they came to see Graham. And they see this 8-minute solo that's just beautiful. And it's still beautiful. And even more beautiful because it's danced by Miki Orihara, who danced with Graham for 30 years. And she knows it to her bones. She knows it. And it's incredible to see her dancing this incredibly rigorous emotional solo with this in this art installation. That's and this kind of aspect of the reply is also important because it brings together not just choreographers but other artists.
And you said something, she knows it to her bones.
To her bones.
The role of the dancer, right? As the carrier of that knowledge. I mean, I always remember the very first performance from Cestulabert in reconstructing Gerhard Bohner. It was a beautiful piece and he danced it marvelous. But then I saw the same piece danced still by him 20 years later, and I was crying and I was touched. And so these 20 years, it came to be part of everything he is as a full being, not just as a technique and how the piece works, but there is something more. And that comes also to maturity, how you carry a piece. And I think, again, Dieter and Jutta, that makes a difference. Also to a historic work, to really understand it. For some things you need a different. I think you can also, as a young one, discover work. That's not the point. That's not the point. But that it becomes part of your, you could say, DNA.
I would say it's really embodied knowledge then. So I would use this word. Actually, you are having a cooperation with Max Hurt, Damage Good. Here I come to a question. This is different, probably very much different. But how do you get along with like the copyright issues? Do you have? I mean, it's more a question. I think.
Yes, I can answer that.
Is this is in archiving kind of a big question? Could you shortly say just something to how you deal with that?
Well, I mean, there are two things. So this is not about documenting. So when we work with artists, the artists, they allow us to dance the work all over, but we also leave all the rights with the archive. He can even do it on another company because we feel the work has to be shown. So we don't, as the producer and someone who paid, we don't put any limits on it. And so that's our attitude. Many choreographers still have the way that the rights stay with the choreographer. So you know, have been building up the Pina Bausch archive, and it was a shock to the dancers when Pina died in 2009. It was already right that the son, who had never danced anything, was the owner of the rights, and they had no rights whatsoever. And this is, if I look around, is still very much the case with even the most avant-garde makers. When it comes to that, it stays. So from our side, we don't keep anything. We want to be as open so that it can be danced and be used, and we put in no limitation. And as we had done with the Tanz von Erbe there, when pieces were redone, we really made secure that everybody is fine, that it's shown to the general public. And but that is still very different from the. I mean, it's only now that the Pina Bausch archive is really putting one piece after the next free online to be seen, the documentation material. That wasn't in the beginning. It was also a process, because very simple, a work that is not seen will be dead.
Dies.
Yeah, that's very easy.
So hard.
And also the question what you can do, because you were saying, for me that was again a point when you the question, is it 100% the original, and what can be changed? Strong work can be twisted, changed. You can make something, but it will always appear. And bad work you have everywhere, and you might have bad reconstructions. You know, have a bad new piece on stage. That's not. You don't need to fear mediocre quality. This is all around. This is part of the business. But the strong works, they have a way of shining through, even through very. You know, it's my belief and also experience, and also make it accessible. I mean, I totally agree. It's still a question, and in a way, it's absurd, because the material are all around. Right now, you can make an AI program. Just put in all the information from Mac, and we will have a perfect video of a work of Mac which doesn't exist, which looks like Mac work. That's easy to be done. So the copyright issue is no.
But I think it's very
I'm
important to
getting
talk
carried away.
about it. Yeah, because some artists, choreographers deal it quite strictly, and this sounds very generous. It's also my position. But I think we have to discuss this in the whole dance scene.
Yes, but there's something I have to say. What I can understand with a choreographer who also defines, for example, foresight. He is totally in control of what kind of work is shown. There is a whole work which will never be in the last period, that will not be performed again, and also documentations in which way they're out in the public. So he as long as he lives, and maybe also the foundation, he wants to have control how the work is seen. So many artists still have that. It's not to still have that, have that.
Yeah. So coming to a final question to both of you, what effect has had the professional engagement with the topic of aging in dance on you personally? And what significance does this topic have for our society in your view?
Well, I can say for myself, which maybe other dancers who might see this possibly could relate to, is when dancehall was presented to me initially, I didn't have an interest in it because I am one of the lucky few. I was at the time 43, 44, and I was working. I was dancing. I was also working for choreographers, Emio Greco and Lucinda Childs. So the idea of dealing with my age wasn't actual. It wasn't really relevant in the moment. But the application looked interesting. I thought, well, if I want to try something else, this would be the chance. And so I went for it, moved to Berlin, joined the company and everything. But as I did that, and as I've toured with Dance On and met other dancers, as I've been exposed to this issue of ageism in dance, I have come to realize how important it is to dancers. Like, I can't express how many emails I get from dancers wanting to join. And it makes me profoundly sad that I can't offer all of them a job, because I see the need for it. And although I was one of the lucky few, there are a few of us who danced into their 50s with a choreographer, with a company, because they valued us and they didn't want us to go. So I didn't at the time feel it. I did have the experience, of course, of going to auditions in my 40s and being asked if I was the teacher of the audition. Like, no. These sort of microaggressions with your age, you think like, wow, okay. So I did experience these small things, but I was never fired for my age. I was never pushed out. But I met a lot of people who were at 39, at 40, very directly and brutally removed. So I have started to recognize the value of this company more than I say when I joined. So I think the first effect on me is understanding what it means to dancers outside of myself. And for me, that's been really an eye-opening experience to understand how this topic is so relevant to dancers. And for me, of course, it's just been a great opportunity to work with lots of different people that as I mentioned earlier, I was one of those people who was working for someone that I could have continued with. But I would never have been hired into another situation. I certainly could never have started auditioning at 48 or 50 or...
You don't need to.
No.
You just stay in that.
But I think also, like, it just wouldn't have happened, you know, like, no one would have taken me. So it's...
we keep you.
But I know this from people who've even made applications to auditions. They don't even get invited. And so I think that was important. Also personally, like I say, to be able to continue to dance and to work with all these interesting choreographers and other interesting dancers, to be in a room with other dancers my own age and exclusively, and not with half or more than half of the room being much, much younger than me, is also fantastic. And I think it's addictive. for all of the dancers in the ensemble, because all of them do small projects here and there on the side, and they all come back to the dance-on rehearsals or performances and say, "Oh, thank God I'm here. This is so great," and I appreciate and value this extremely. That I think to be in a room of your peers is also challenging in a much more profound way. You're inspired to continue to grow, to do something more.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
And we have this. I mean, we had a public talking round where it wasn't about dance, about age. And when I talked about it, people were very touched that there is a positive example how to deal with the subject of age and an aging society. We know it's only defined as problems. Age is, deterioration of health. We cost much too much. We are part of the baby boomer generation. How can a society finance that, afford all these old people? And it will be drastic. It's exponential. That's the word. Well, we become more because we get older. Also the next generation, they will get even older. And there is no concept. Society doesn't have a concept. It says there is youth, there's middle age working, and then there is sort of this long period. And for me, this is a really best practice, not just for the dancing, to really value the individual dancers, which is at the core of the profession, but to create us, ourselves, as human beings who go through life as one permanent movement, you could say. And, I once read this nice line, it's so strange. Age discrimination is the only form of discrimination which isn't directed against others because of their sexual orientation or
race,
where they come from, but against my own future self. So what we need to change, and that is of course a message which I haven't come up with, is the images we have into head. And for me this is so beautiful as an aging woman, which is specifically also a little different from the man, which you know around the table, to work around something which also creates a different image, and I'm very grateful for that.
So thank you so much for this talk with you. It was inspiring for me too. And thank you having you here, and go on, dance on, I would say. Pass on and dream on.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to the dancers. Please let them know that we had this nice talk.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.